Let's see who we have. Maxine, Alan, Samson, Mary, Susan is here. Khan, Ayala. Okay. I hope everybody else is.
Elliot, we see you twice.
No.
Oh no, it's not. It's okay.
Okay. So first of all, we're going to have a class. Obviously today we're going to have also next week. Then we're going to take a break for Pesach. For Pesach, we're not going to have a class, so we're going to resume after Pesach. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to mute everybody, and we're going to go right into today's class. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and why am I not seeing what I'm supposed to be seeing? Okay. This is not what I want. Let's try it again. Here we go. And okay, everybody see that? Okay, so we're in business. Okay, so today we're going to compare and see the similarities between Shaul and Gidon. If you remember, Gidon is one of the judges. It's in the book of Judges. And generally speaking, we're going to talk about that later at the end. We see kind of similarities to the book of Judges. If you remember, in the order of the books in the Bible, Judges comes right before the book of Samuel. So when there's a reference or a parallelism or a similarity between an event or a character or something from the book of Samuel to the book of Judges, we kind of look at that as not a coincidence. And a lot of the stories, a lot of the classes that we're dealing with are actually dealing with that. So today we're going to talk about one of the judges, Gidon, and the first king of Israel, which was Shaul. Gidon, I'm just going to kind of give the story of Gidon. He was the fifth judge, and he was the judge after Dvorah. And what happened was that during the time of Dvorah, the nations of Canaan, right, the local nations over there in the region, they were defeated by Dvorah, right? So Dvorah had a tremendous victory, and they were defeated by Dvorah. And with time, they were kind of like testing the waters, and they were trying to gain their power again and going against the Jewish state. So times are not so great. Okay, the Jews are experiencing a lot of attacks, etc. And God sends a prophet. We don't know who that prophet was. The prophet says they're going to have salvation. And following that prophecy, God's angel appears and appears in the house or whatever, in the territory, in the land of the family of Gidon. So Gidon sees the angel while he's working. He was a farmer, and he says to him, "Hashem imcha gibor chayil," God be with you. Now this is a greeting that we are familiar with. We saw it in other books and everything. That was like, like what people used to say, Shalom Aleichem. It's like, God, and what what Gideon replies, he says, ויש השם עמנו ולמה מצאתנו כל זאת? והיה כל נפלאותיו אשר סיפרו לנו אבותינו לאמור עלו ממצרים אלינו אדוני ואתה נטשנו אדוני, etc., etc. He said, is it? Is it that God is with us? Is it really? Because how can you explain all this really hard time that we're going through? And if God is with us, why we have all this really difficult time? And what happened to all those wonders and all those miracles that we've been told that God brought us out of Egypt? But now it seems that God left us and left us to Midian. And the Midianites are doing like really terrible things to us. So he's really critical of the prophecy that was given by the prophet earlier. And the angel says to Gideon, you can do it. You're going to be the man. You're going to save the Jewish people. And of course, Gideon says, no, I'm the wrong person for the job. I'm the youngest. It's not for me, you know, because he's modest. But the angel says to him, don't worry, God is going to be with you. You can do it. What happens at that point? At that point, Gideon asked the angel for proof. He said, I want to know, I want to have a proof that you were sent by God. And so Gideon brings the angel, it brings meat and matzah and soup. And the angel tells Gideon to leave the meat and the matzah on the rock, and the soup he should pour down. And that's what Gideon does. And then fire comes out of the rock and kind of consumes the matzah and the meat. Later on, we're going to see that Gideon demands more miracles and more signs as he goes into battle. Okay, so Gideon received that, but we're not there yet. Gideon also received the first miracle about the food. And at that point, he is afraid. He said, like, I've seen God. It means I'm going to die. If you remember, deja vu to what? The story of Manoach, the story of the parents of Shimshon, because when they get the prophecy that they're going to have a baby that is going to save, right? So the angel came to them as well, and they are afraid that they're going to die because they saw the angel of God. Anyway, in any event, he continues with the plan. So Gideon builds an altar, and he's still afraid. He doesn't know if this is going to work or not. So what he does, he goes at night with 10 of his people. And what he does, he destroys the altar that his father built. His father was a priest for the Baal, and he destroyed his father's altar, and he cuts off the tree that was planted by his father. That tree was used for worshiping of the Asherah. And then he slaughters a bull, and he brings korban to God. In the morning, his father's followers, come to his father, to Yoash. Yoash, that's Gideon's father. They come to him, and they want to kill Gideon. And Yoash tells them, well, you know what? If this is Gideon that sinned towards the Baal, and let the Baal take revenge, not you. Like the Baal, obviously, that's the idol, to kill him. In any event, going back to the political and to what happens. So Midian, Amalek, and Bnei Kedem all gathered together in Emek Israel, the valley of, how they draw it? Jezreel, I think, Jezreel, whatever valley. They all gathered together. And it says, Ruach Hashem lavsha et Gidon. And Gidon has the spirit of God. He blows the shofar, takes his family with him. And not only that, he takes into that war his own tribe, Menashe, and the northern tribes together. Those are from Menashe, Asher, Zvulun, and Naphtali. And together he's got 32,000 warriors. And he camps in Ein Harod. Okay? Not very far from the camp of the Midianites. It's time to go into battle, and Gideon asked for signs, more signs from God. So it's interesting. He's the one to define those signs. He tells God what kind of sign is going to satisfy him. So, for example, he takes a piece of wool, and he said the sign is going to be that if that piece of wool is going to be wet, but the ground, the ground beneath the wool is going to be dry, that's going to be a sign. The next night, he does the opposite. He wants that the ground is going to be wet, but the piece of wool is going to remain dry. Okay, those signs are given to him. And then what happens is a very interesting thing. God wants to prove to the nation that this victory is not going to be achieved because they had a big army, but rather it's because God is going to intervene. God is going to be part of the battle, and they need to acknowledge that. How that's going to happen? God tells Gideon to send home anyone who is afraid. Anyone who is afraid from a battle, go home. So Gideon does that, and he remains with 10,000 warriors. So 22,000 people left. Then God tells Gideon, I want to do another screening. And this is an interesting one. According to whatever scholars, this is the place, by the way. It's the cave of En Harod. So I put here the picture of that. It's a test of how the warrior is going to drink water. He brings the warriors into a spring of water, and over there, he watches them how they're going to drink the water. 300 warriors picked the water in their hands and brought their hands close to their mouth, and this is how they drank. Okay? But 9,700 warriors, they kneeled, got closer to the water, and this is how they drank. Okay? Those 9,700 were asked to go home. There's a lot of interpretations, what it means, whatever. According to one interpretation is that why they did that, why they kneeled, because that was their practice. They used to bow down to idols. So automatically it was an action that they're used to do, kneel, and therefore, okay, that's one interpretation. Doesn't matter. But Gideon is left with 300 warriors. That's it. And God tells him to go and attack that night. But God tells him, listen, if you're still afraid, you should gather some intelligence. And what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? You're going to take your servant, it's the two of you, go to the camp of Midian and listen to the conversations over there. And that's what he does. He goes to the camp, and in the middle of the night, and he listened to a conversation between two soldiers of Midian. And in that conversation, one soldier tells about the dream that he had. And in that dream, basically, his friend interprets for him the dream and tells him that means we're going to be defeated. And when Gidon hears that conversation, he understood that the Midianites are afraid of him, and he's going to be successful. Now that he is confident, he divides his 300 people. Remember, it's only 300 people. He divides them into 3 groups. And he says to them something that is very important. Mimeni tirau v'chen ta'asu. Okay, we're going to talk about that. Mimeni tiru v'chen ta'asu. You can see that text here on the left bottom picture. We're going to get to that in a minute. And he tells them, when you get the sign, what you're going to do is, he gave them all, he gave them vases, like, clay vases with fire inside. And so when you get the sign, then you're going to break those pots, those vases, whatever, and you're going to have the fire. You're going to blow the shofar. That created huge commotion in the camp of Midian, and they started fighting each other, and they started running away. Now, Midian, the people of Midian are starting, so they cross the Jordan. They want to go back to Midian. And at that time, he calls the people of Naphtali, Asher, and Menashe to continue chasing them. He sends messengers also to the people of Ephraim to come to the crossing points of the Jordan River and to block the Midianites towards the Jordan. And they do that, and not only, and they're successful, and they're successfully also killing the 2 generals of Midian. And then he goes, he goes and he chases the others, the one that were able to run away, and he is whatever, with 300 people only, and he is able to catch those generals, whatever, and he kills them, and so it becomes very successful story. After the fact, okay, so he comes back after the battle. So the elders of the nation come to him with a very interesting proposal. They want him to become the king of Israel. And that's the first time that we see, actually, this idea of Jewish king. And he refuses. And he says something very interesting. I'm going to find that quote in a second. He says to them, I'm not going to rule over you, only God can rule over you. Okay? That, by the way, mimeni tiru v'chen ta'asu, that picture. So here in the pictures, okay, this is art. This is the tombstone of Gidon that is believed to be next to the settlement of Itamar. This is the cave of En-Harod, where the test with the warriors, the spring, with the water, how they're going to drink, took place in that cave. And that saying of Gidon, mimeni tiru, you will fear from me, and this is how you will do it, became a motto in the first in the in the Palmach, but later on also in IDF. And this is the text that was chosen to be on the IDF Officers Academy on the building. So Gidon was a character that inspired generations of Israeli warriors later on. Okay, that's the story of Gidon. Let's move on. One of the most interesting, I think at least, the most interesting similarities is between the character of Shaul and Gidon. We're talking about the war of Shaul against the Plishtim. And we're going to see what's the purpose. It's going to be very, very clear what's the purpose of those similarities. So first of all, why do I say that I see the similarities? Both are called, as we are introduced to them, are called Gibor Chayil, heroes. Both, out of modesty, at first they refused to take the role. Okay? Gidon just said, I'm the wrong person, I'm the youngest, blah, blah, blah. Same goes for Shaul. I come from the smallest tribe. My family is the youngest of all the tribes of Binyamin. Yeah, it's true. It's not me. Both receive a promise that God will be with them, right? In the book of Shiftim, and with the story of Gidon, as we just said, Vayomer elav Hashem ki eheye imach. God told him specifically, I will be with you. And in the book of Shmuel, with the story of Shaul, Aseh lecha asher timtza yadecha ki ha'Elohim imach. Shmuel says to Shaul, God will be with you. Next point. Both get signs, miracles for self-confidence, right? So Gidon asks for those signs, but Shaul, if you remember, he gets a sign about the donkeys, the lost donkeys. Remember what happened, the story with Shaul. Shaul was sent by his father to go and find the lost donkeys that they had. The sign that he receives from Shmuel is, you're going to find those donkeys. So that was a sign that whatever I'm telling you, meaning Shmuel, what I'm telling you, you're going to be the king, is also true. So they both get sign for self-confidence. Okay, at this point, the similarities show that Shaul is actually better than Gidon, because Gidon asks for those signs and Shaul doesn't ask for any sign. So he has got perhaps greater faith in God. We'll see. And the last one is a very, very similar language. Thus said the Lord, the God of Israel, I brought you out of Egypt and freed you from the house of bondage. I rescued you from the Egyptians and from all the oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. Verses, thus said the Lord, the God of Israel, I brought Israel out of Egypt and I delivered you from the hands of the Egyptians and of all the kingdoms that oppressed you. So it's almost the same language is used in both cases. Okay, so that's between the two people. Let's compare now the two battles. The one against the Plishtim, i.e. Shaul's battle, versus the one against Midian, which was what? which was Gideon's battle. So here we also see a lot of similarities. Number one, both talk about a reality of very few against very, very large number. So Ma'atim mul Rabim. Okay? The enemy is numerous. Kachol asher al sfat hayam larov. That's a term that appears in both cases, like the sand on the seashore, like the sand grain. Okay? Both cases. On the contrary, what happens with the Jewish army? We go in both cases, we go through a major screening and elimination process that leave us with a very small army. Okay? If you remember, in the story of Midian, the message was God is going to be taking control here, and therefore it is necessary to show that is against all odds. Only 300 people, that's enough to defeat a numerous army. Thousands of thousands of thousands of people, right? And they go through that process, meaning anyone who is afraid should go home. That sent already 22,000. Then another 9,700 were sent home because of the test of of how to drink water. Ended up with 300. What about in the story of Shaul? Well, here there was no command to send them home, but as time progresses, people defeated, people ran away, ending up with a very small army, right? And Shaul ends up with a small army of 600 people only. Next, both battles start with the same call or the same call to action. What is it? ויתקע בשופר ויזעק אחריו. They use the shofar, they blow the shofar in order to call and to start the battle, in both cases. But the case of Shaul, ושאול תקע בשופר ויצעקו העם אחרי שאול. Okay, in both battles we see that the Jewish people were afraid and they hid. Okay, when it comes to Midian, עשו להם בני ישראל את המנהרות אשר בהרים ואת המערות ואת המצדות, so they hide in the caves, in the mountains, in the tunnels. And in the story of Shaul, ואיש ישראל ויתחבאו העם במערות ובחוכים ובסלעים ובצריחים ובבורות. They also hid in those caves and rocks and wherever they could because they were afraid. At this point, we see a shift in the similarities. Up until now, we saw the similarities between Gideon and Shaul, and in both cases, meaning the war against Midian and the war against Plishtim. What happens at that point? At that point is Shaul's failure in the Gilgal that we spoke about last week. So from that point on, there are no similarities between the two people. On the contrary, at this point, things change, and it's not the similarities, but rather the differences between the two. And one of them is that three-head tactic. If you remember, as I said before, Gideon takes his force of 300 people, divide them to three heads or three groups, and they attack from three different directions. right? What happens in the story of Shaul with Plishtim? It's actually that particular tactic is done by the Plishtim against Shaul. ויצא המשחית ממחנה פלישתים 3 ראשים. They use exactly the same thing. Okay, so there's similarities between Gideon and Shaul, and between the war of Midian and the war against Plishtim. Everything is similar and parallel to the point of Shaul's failure in the Gilgal. That's the war of Michmash that we learned about last week. Once that happened, it's actually the opposite. Let's move on. But that's not the end. Here, I compare Gideon with Shaul, but not Shaul with the war against Plishtim, but rather Shaul's first war against Ammon. And in that point, meaning Shaul's first war, before his failure in Michmash, the similarities are there. So let's look at that. In the war against Ammon, I'm here on the top, in the war against Ammon, we see about Shaul a very important description that we do not see later on in the war against the Plishtim. Spirit of God. Vatitzlach ruach Elohim al Shaul. Right? The Spirit of God was on Shaul. Not later on when it comes to the war in Plishtim, but yes, in the first war against Ammon, before he failed. And very similar way, Beruach Hashem lavsha et Gideon, and the Spirit of God was with Gideon. In both cases, the leaders, i.e. Gideon and Shaul, they sent messengers throughout the land, right? Gideon, umalachim shalach b'chol Menashe, umalachim shalach ba'asher u'zbulun ve'naftali. And what about Shaul? Vayishlach b'chol gevul Yisrael beyad ha'malachim. Right? The idea is sending those messengers to gather an army. But it's the same idea. Both leaders attack at night. Vayavo Gideon rosh hashmoret hatichona. And when it comes to Shaul, vayavo betoch hamachaneh be'ashmoret haboker. Ashmoret haboker, that means just before dawn. So, it's striking. We see the similarities between Gideon and Shaul. We see the similarities between, let's call it, young Shaul and Gideon. Shaul pre-failure in the Gilgal, before the war at Michmash. And of course, we see the similarities between the battles. Having that in mind, the contrast to that is what's going on with Shaul at that point. It makes it even clearer that instead of the attitude and the approach that Shaul had in the war against Ammon, he was very active. Now he's passive. And it is highlighted because the text highlights and said it twice, this idea of Yoshvim, Yoshev, he is sitting. That means he sits and does nothing. He waits for somebody else to react. Okay, I'll put the English translation here. He basically waits. He's waiting. He's not doing anything. He's not initiating anything. Now, what's interesting is, look at the last pasuk that I included here. Okay, the Kohen of God, right? Beshilo noseh ephod, meaning the Kohen who has the answers, who has the ability to communicate with God through the Urim Betumim, through the ephod, through the breastplate, is there. So it's not that Shaul is unable to communicate with God, and because he's unable to communicate with God, he's passive and not initiate something. No, he could. The phone is right there next to him, but he chooses not to pick up the phone, and he's passive. Meaning, if he wanted to hear God's orders, he could have. But he chooses to sit doing nothing against the Plishtim. And there's no doubt that his behavior is an outcome of what just happened in the Gilgal. The previous sin in the Gilgal, and Shmuel told them, "Ve'ata mamlachtecha lo takum." Therefore, Shmuel tells him, you are not going to remain the king. We talked about it last week. So here we see the contrast, completely opposite of Gidon. That's not over, because the similarities continues, this time not with Shaul, but rather with Yonatan. Shaul's son, Yonatan. And we see the similarities, striking similarities between Gidon and Yonatan. At this point, it moves from Shaul to Yonatan. First, remember what we said last time about Yonatan trying to understand the psychic or psychological state of the Plishtim, and he tests them. He goes, only him and his servant, and he says, let's see if they're going to call us to come up to us, to the top of the hill, or they're going to come down to us. If they're going to come down to us, that means that they are charged and they have and they are eager to fight. But if they're going to ask us to come to them, that means they're lazy. And that means we're going to win, right? So he goes on that collecting intelligence only with his servant. Him and the Nar, Yonatan and the Nar. Same goes for Gidon. Gidon, the night before battle, he goes and he hears the conversation of the two Midianites. It's only him and his servant. Atau furan na'archa. Okay? And what they're trying to do is to have a sign from God. Gidon, he says, Lecha v'na'avra, I'm sorry, ויאמר השם אליו, קום רד במחנה, כי נתתי בידיך, ושמעת מה ידברו, ואחר תחזקנה ידיך. Go to the Midianites camp, go see what the conversation is. Based on that, you will see that you're gonna win. And what about the story of Yonatan? He initiated that, and he said, if they're gonna call us, or if not, blah blah blah. And he said, then I know that God will help us. Right? אם כה יאמרו לנו blah blah blah, ואם כה יאמרו blah blah blah, ועלינו כי נתנם אדוני בידינו, בזה לנו האות. And we will know because God is going to be with us. So it's very, very similar. Okay. Next, after receiving the sign, okay, and both signs are hearing the enemy. One is they heard Gidon hears the conversation between the two Midianites, but in the case of Yonatan, it's what? They actually talk to him, but either way, they receive the sign, which is hearing the enemy. They have confidence in their victory. Gidon says, once he hears the conversation, he says, get up, God is with us, we're going to be victorious. Same goes for Yonatan. ויאמר יונתן, עלה אחריי כי נתנם אדוני ביד ישראל. Follow me because God has given us the victory. Next point. The attack had the same outcome, almost the same language. וישם אדוני את חרב איש ברעהו, והנה הייתה חרב איש ברעהו, meaning they killed each other. They were so surprised, they were so confused, the Plishtim or the Midianites, that they started killing each other because of all the commotion that was created. Next point, third from the bottom. People from Mount Ephraim joined the chase. If you remember, the people of the enemy is starting to move towards the Jordan, and what happens? Malachim shalar Gidon bechol har Ephraim, and Gidon sends the messenger to Ephraim, Vayitzak kol ish Ephraim balkedu, and the people of Ephraim join the battle and they block the enemy from running away. What happens in the story of Shaul and Yonatan? וכל איש ישראל מתחבאים בהר אפרים, וידבקו גם הם אחריהם. So Yonatan starts the battle, and then the people, where are the rest of the warriors? They are in Har Ephraim. It's the same place. They're in Har Ephraim, and once they see the enemy, the Plishtim, starting to run away towards direction, they chase them. So Har Ephraim. Okay, then the warriors are hungry and tired towards the end of the war. That's something that happens in both battles. And that's very interesting because, because the text actually mentioned that they're tired and they're hungry. And the last point is numbers are irrelevant, meaning, if you remember in the story of Gideon, God says to Gideon, you need to reduce the army, reduce the army, reduce the army. And God told him in the beginning, ויאמר אדוני אל גדעון רב העם. It's too much, too many warriors, you don't need it. In a similar way, Yonatan says, כי אין לאדוני מעצור להושיע ברב או במעט. God can save us. If God is with us, we can be few numbers or many warriors. It really makes no difference. So it's the same idea. And that's exactly what Yonatan believes in. And the belief of Yonatan is what brought him the victory in contrast to his father's behavior. And this contradiction or the difference between those two, between i.e. Shaul and Yonatan, this is being highlighted by the striking similarities to Gideon. So it seems that it was not coincidental that the text, or if we go with our assumption, which is the traditional way to assume that Shmuel wrote the book of Shmuel, or whatever, according to other opinions, it was somebody after the times of Shmuel. But the point is that that person knew the story of Gideon, and whoever wrote the book of Shmuel knew the story of Gideon and did that and wrote the story with those similarities in mind. It was deliberate. And the idea is to send a very strong message. Shaul is the first king, and as the first king, he is going to what? Have a test. The test of belief in God. To see, if you remember, that was exactly what Shmuel was afraid of. That's exactly what Shmuel was afraid of. Shmuel said, אל תיראו אתם עשיתם את כל הרעה, אך אל תסורו מאחורי אדוני ועבדתם את אדוני בכל לבבכם. Don't worry, everything will be okay if you're going to be with God. And of course, as we learned, Shaul fails in that test. It's a taste of faith in God. What happened in the Gilgal? He takes things to his own hands. He doesn't wait for the okay from God. That was the test, and he failed. Compare that with Gideon. Gideon is the only judge that was offered to become a king, to start a monarchy. Nonetheless, he says, here's the pasuk, whoops, the first one on the blue. Vayomru ish Yisrael el Gideon. Oh, I had it in English. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson as well, for you have saved us from the Midianites. But Gideon replied, I will not rule over you myself, nor shall my son rule over you. Hashem alone shall rule over you. Here's the person that was offered that, and he says no. Because Gideon understands the danger in the monarchy. And what I only said, and he also reminds the Jewish people that there's only one true king, God. That's it. This idea resonates, and not only resonates, who also believes in this was Jonathan, not Shaul, but Jonathan. These here, right? So Shaul wants to kill, here's the English. Shaul wants to kill David, but Jonathan is going to save him. Not only that, in another incident here in the green, Shaul is angry with Jonathan, his son, and he says, like, what are you doing? You choose David over yourself. Jonathan is the one, if there's monarchy, Jonathan is the one who's going to be the king. He is the son of the king. He is the prince. He is the next king. But he realizes that it's not about who your father is, but rather it's whoever God chooses. And he realizes that there's somebody else that is more suitable. Maybe yes, maybe no, maybe he understands, maybe he likes it, maybe he doesn't like it. But he is a bigger person. And therefore, he supports David. Even though by supporting David, he knows that he himself is not going to be the king. Now, I want to take it another step. I want to make it relevant a little bit. So the story that we learned today, we learned basically that leadership means being a true servant of public servant. Leadership, that means to be a servant of the nation. It's not a privilege. And accepting God's decision, even if it goes against me. Right? That's the story. That's what Jonathan says, and that's what Gideon says. Gideon says, like, I don't need to be the king, not my kids, not my grandchildren. There's only one king, that is God. It goes to something that is much, much bigger than that, and relates perhaps to Pesach, and relates also, by the way, to other concepts in Judaism. Okay, and we spoke about that like a little bit. There's only one true king, that's God, because the idea of people having power over other people is something that goes against the philosophy of the Torah. The Torah comes against it. The whole point of the Exodus is to show the world that we do not believe in this idea that people have power over people. Now, what I'm going to do is something a little bit different and something bold. So I hope that everybody will understand what I'm saying. Don't take it out of context. I want to talk a little bit about politics and our reality. Here in America, we had elections not a long time ago. And believe it or not, the Israelis are going to go and vote for the fourth time next Tuesday. And according to the polls and everything, it's going to result in a big nothing because they're probably going to go for fifth elections, according to the polls. So we're talking about a reality, in our reality, at least, that we just had elections here in America. And in Israel, they're going to election next week, next Tuesday. Now, we live in a time where God doesn't send us a prophet, okay? And it's difficult to know what God really wants, right? But what we've learned today is that the king doesn't have his own power, but rather only if he listens to the word of God. So God is the one who sent that leader, and therefore the leader, the king, is obligated to listen to God, even if he doesn't like the message. So far, so good. I don't think that's controversial. Lehavdil. Let's take a jump into our reality. In a democracy, who sends the leader to his position in the state? It's the people. It's the people. The people vote for person A or person B. So the president, the prime minister is chosen by the people, and therefore that leader is obligated to the people. Now, the last election here in America were not about policy, economy, opinions, none of that stuff. They were about one question only. Are you a supporter of President Trump or not? That's it. If you remember, there is, at least I think, to my knowledge, I don't remember, but I haven't been here long enough. That was one of the only times, at least that I remember, where you had Republicans supporting Biden. Not because they wanted Biden or a Democratic president, but rather because they didn't want Trump as a president. Today, the election in Israel are not about right or left. Yes, peace process with the Palestinians. Yes, giving territories. No giving, this, that, whatever. Peace, no peace, whatever, economy, none of those questions. Those who wants to put together a coalition without Netanyahu are willing to sit down, right and left together, different opinions, secular with religious, anything goes. Probably a coalition that is not going to be able to function, but as long as it's not Bibi, as long as it's not Netanyahu. So the question today, when it comes to the election in Israel, is: are you for Bibi or against Bibi? That's the only question. Everything else is irrelevant. Now, to their credit, both Trump and Bibi believe that they have a right way. They have, I have to accept the fact that they believe, both of them believe, that they have the ability, the knowledge, whatever, to do the right thing for the nation. Okay, I'm not going to assume that they are corrupt, that they're bad people, and none of that stuff. They are convinced that they have the answers. They are the right person in the right time to do the job. But here's the problem. The moment that the question becomes you become the question, it's not your way, it's not your ideas, it's not your ability to solve crisis, etc. It's you, it's your personality that is here for the test. I believe that at that point, that leader needs to go. Just like Shaul. Shaul thought that he was convinced that he has the ability and the way, and he is the right person for the task. But he didn't realize that it's not his decision. The decision is given, or the decision is of his sender. And who sent him? God. God sent him. Same goes here. It's the people. The people sent him, Trump and Netanyahu, to that position. And perhaps they are the best leaders available at this time in history. Maybe yes, maybe no. I'm not going to make that call. It really doesn't matter. The point is that it is impossible that the discussion, the conversation is going to be whether I like the president or the prime minister or not, whether I believe him or not, whether the conversation is it's for or against a coalition, for or against Bibi. The conversation was not about Trump. Like, conversation was about Trump. It was not about his political ideas. It was not about his economy. He was none of that stuff. There was none about it. Was about his style, about his the way he talks, or whatever, all that kind of stuff. And what I think is that true leaders, or at least if we learn something from today's class, is that leaders supposed to serve. They're supposed to be, at least to the Torah, like the Torah's idea, they really have to be like kind of a gray, unknown, no-face clerks. Somebody who's chosen to do a task, do the task, and that's it. None is about you. It's not about you. It's whether the people like you or don't, it's completely irrelevant. That's what God is trying to do. If I say you're the person, then you're going to do it. It doesn't matter if you have charisma, if you have money, if you have any of that stuff or not. And unfortunately, I think that the reality that we live in both cases, is very, very different. And again, I'm not taking any political views. I'm not saying anything for or against Trump or for or against Bibi. I want to be very, 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 very clear about that. Very clear about that. I'm not. But I think that it's the message from the Torah is that it cannot be about the personality of the leader. It's got to be about the real thing, about the ideas, about what he represents, about the will of the people. It can't be, oh, I like him, I don't like him. I believe him, I don't believe him. He's corrupted, he's not corrupt. Completely irrelevant. And if the conversation comes to that point, then we're in big trouble. Very big trouble. And that's exactly what happened. Okay, I'm going to do this. And